On today's Technobabble, design rules for beginners.
This is Tech No Babble, your weekly source for church video and graphics news, perspectives, tips, and tricks. And now here's your host, Paul Clifford.
Well, I'm hoping that this all works well because I've got a few different things in the setup. I'm, of course, using my new Logitech C615 from that I ordered from Amazon last week, and I'm now also using what is pretty straightforward. It is Wirecast 5, which will work with Mavericks theoretically. So I've had to do some tweaks to make that work. By the way, I am your host, Paul Allen Clifford, and you can reach me, Paul, at trinitydigitalmedia.com, or just go to trinitydigitalmedia.com/contact, and you can find all the other ways to reach me there. So let's get started talking about design rules for beginners. One of the things that I've noticed is that people that are beginning in design, they don't know that there are some rules that you can follow that will make things a lot easier for you. You don't just jump in and you have an inspiration and it comes out perfectly. Now that takes time. What doesn't take time though is following a few rules to make your designs better in the beginning. Doing that will make it easier to get into design. I know that when I first started, I learned about this first rule that I'm going to tell you about, and immediately all my photography got better. Immediately, because I didn't know that it was the case that you were supposed to put the most important thing in your composition in the top third. So if you'll look at the video, if you're watching the video, it is my eyes. My eyes are on the top third line of this frame. Now I could move over to the side and get my head in the left third of the frame. It's my left, your right, if I wanted to get really good at it. But you see what I'm talking about, that you want to envision a tic-tac-toe board. You know, a line on the top third, a line on the bottom third, a line on the left third, and a line on the right third. And at the junctions of those, you would put the most important things. So when I put in a lower third, which I had in just a moment ago, that goes on the bottom third of the screen, hence the term lower third. So if you start there, I think you'll automatically get better than if you put everything in the middle of your frame. So here I'm going to duck down just a little bit, and in doing that I have put my head in the middle of the frame. So now the most important thing is the churchtechcast.com sign. So that's not really the truth. It's the subject of the shot that's the most important thing. So I'm going to go ahead and move that up. Secondly, let's talk about simplicity, and hand in hand with this is white space. I used to work, after I worked in television, the next thing I did was I managed a shop that sold scrubs, like for medical personnel, scrubs. The owner of that company, he had 4 locations, and he thought that he was a designer, but he wasn't. So he would send out direct mail talking about his shop and offering discounts and everything, and it was atrocious. It's not that he was a bad person, he just wasn't a designer. So he would use 5 or 6 different kinds of fonts and no white space. He wanted to make the most of every last millimeter of space on the card that he would send out. And it was so crowded that it was just annoying. Now you can do something like that by fading some of the text into the background so that it's less prominent, and so that the main text is to the foreground. So it gives it kind of some breathing room. But a lot of times you'll see that well-designed blogs, well-designed websites in particular, will have a lot of what you might think is wasted space, but it's actually there on purpose to give your eye breathing room. I don't know how else to say it. So a simple design with white space is really something that's quite beneficial. Additionally, let's talk about using the right fonts. There are different types of fonts. There are body fonts and there are title fonts, and that's how I think of them. A body font is a font that you would imagine that a book would be printed in. Arial, Helvetica, Times New Roman. That's a body font. A title font is a specialized font that is used for a title. So while you wouldn't want the entire book printed in a grungy font, just the title, yeah, that's fine. While you wouldn't want the whole book printed in a script font unless you were trying to do something very special because it would be harder to read. A script on the front of a romance novel, for example, would be fine. So script fonts, grunge fonts, specialty fonts, those should be reserved for just a few words in the piece that you're working on. And when you're working on, say, lyrics on a slide for church, you might want to use the title in those fonts, but please do not use a script font for the lyrics. I know what you're trying to do, but in effect what you're doing is making it hard for people to read. So please don't. So use the right kind of fonts. Use fewer fonts rather than more fonts. So when inkjet printers first came out, Apple pioneered them in the 80s, and there were some other companies. Adobe had something to do with them as well, among others. People started having the freedom to use all kinds of fonts. So almost immediately, just for fun, that's what they would say, memos, invitations, everything would start looking like ransom notes. And by ransom notes, you know what I'm talking about. In the movies, if someone is kidnapping somebody, instead of printing out a note, they'll buy a newspaper and a magazine and cut out the letters they want and glue those on a piece of paper so that it's not as traceable, that kind of thing. That's the way that stuff started to look. Well, thankfully people have gotten better at that and have used it less and less, but you still see things that have like 12 fonts on them. That's way too many. 3 is what you need to look for. 3 or less. Less is better. Normally I'd say 2, but I'll give you a little breathing room and say 3. But 3 is better than 12 better than 15. If you use too many fonts, it's just so distracting. Now you can do that on purpose if you know what you're doing, but most of the time it's better not to. So that's what I'd recommend, is using fewer fonts rather than more. And finally, one of the things I want you to consider is the medium. So what are you designing for? Are you designing for print? That should inform how you design. If you're designing for a website, that should inform how you design. If you're designing for a t-shirt, that should inform how you're designing. If you're designing something to be embroidered on a polo shirt, that should change how you design. So what I mean by this is, on a website you have all kinds of freedom to use a lot of colors. You may not need to use that many colors though. So I want you to be restrained in how you're doing it. Think of the best way to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish and just do a good job at it. The thing that I see quite often is people not taking the medium into account. So they'll design a logo, and I've talked about this on previous episodes, with 5 or 6 different colors, intricate designs, and then they want to put that embroidered on a shirt. Once they do that, they find it looks ugly, and that's because they didn't design for the medium. So someone pointed out that vector graphics are better for things like logos, which are going to be a variety of sizes. The larger the size, the no big deal, because a vector graphic is just a mathematical formula. So if you design a vector graphic as opposed to a raster graphic, a graphic that's a picture, then it can be scaled up. A picture cannot. At a certain point it starts to get fuzzy because there's just no more information there, and you're trying to interpolate. You're trying to guess what is there in a larger picture. So like if you're designing a billboard, you're going to have more trouble if you want to put a picture up there than if you want to, say, put text up there. That's just the way that it goes. So remember that. Design for the medium. I hope that these are some things that will help you in your design, because as you're designing, you can find all sorts of how should I say it? There are all sorts of temptations that you don't want to fall victim to. I really want you to, at least in the beginning, now as you build this up in your head you won't need it, but at least in the beginning, find a referent. Find something that you can use to inform your design, and don't design in a vacuum. I talked about this earlier this week, I think, on one of the other shows where, on the Creating Church show, which is available on trinitydigitalmedia.com, that you should not expect that you're going to design in a vacuum. There's very few times in life, in anything really, where it hasn't been done before in some way. Now you might have a unique spin on it, but things like the rule of thirds last and last, whereas the using acrylic paint might change, or using Photoshop might change, but the basics last and last. So use those as you're trying to figure out your design, and basically as you're going out and changing eternity. Till next time, this is Paul Allen Clifford with TrinityDigitalMedia.com.